Salutations and welcome to the first Mustache review. Today we're going to take an in-depth look at the upcoming MMORPG Sandbox ArcheAge with its September 16th, 2014 release date. ArcheAge is an interesting take on a mixture between an MMO and a sandbox. You have a lot of different factors that play into this game to make it something completely interesting and new, and what the original Korean developer company is trying to do is bring it to America and get a large American player base. We're going to look over a couple of things first here and get into the pros and cons of the games and why it will or will not work when it's over here in America. ArcheAge brings an interesting combination of mechanics to try and separate itself from other MMOs, being that it's a completely open world. The player base has an immense set of options when choosing what to do, including things like trade routes and building towns and kingdoms. ArcheAge allows its players to choose a third faction to change up the makeup of the world and add a feeling of constant pressure to players. But advancing through the game, a player can choose to cast off his or her ties with their original faction and join a third faction made up of pirates from all four races that fights with the original two. This allows players to do things like attack trade routes and capture a cargo, sail the high seas, or even drag their boats across the ground. The ability to choose what your character does helps reinforce ArcheAge's sandbox options, but still gives it a nice RPG feel. To add even more diversity in the gameplay, the class system in ArcheAge is made up of 10 sets of skills instead of the actual concrete classes. This gives players an insane amount of options, as even two players who have the same skill sets can have different playstyles. Abilities are obtained through skill points gained every few levels, maxing out at 23 points, in all meaning that someone with the Shadow Play skill set may take the stealth and archery abilities and passives, whereas someone else with the Shadow Play skill set may take the melee ones. To push this a little farther, ArcheAge also offers passive buffs depending on your equipment type, meaning that an archer may want to dual-wield melee weapons for the passive buff over a two-hander or a sword and board. With a class system as diverse as this, ArcheAge needed to bring in a good combat system to showcase the differences, and accomplishes that with a sleek and fluent system. Much like other MMOs, ArcheAge is based off a point-and-click target system, with some pseudo-like skill shots thrown in to keep it fast-paced and give the feel of a struggle in combat to the player. Since the game is centered around PvP and the sandbox field, players are offered few choices for PvE content, so the combat system really shines through when fighting other players. Using a melee weapon makes the player feel as though they are swinging a giant slab of iron, whereas slinging fireballs at enemies gives the feel of doing just that. We'll go more in depth about the animations and combat systems later in this video. Before we get into the strengths and weaknesses of this game, we'll take a last look at crafting and the trait system. Crafting in ArcheAge is just as diverse as the class system and offers many more options than your standard MMO. Seeing as the economy of the world is fueled by players, ArcheAge had to create some options for things like decor and material creations for players wanting to build their own homes, start their own farms, or even build a kingdom. The usual options such as blacksmithing are also present, however things such as mining are open to anyone and do not take a skill to do. Crafting in ArcheAge, along with other actions such as identifying items or opening items dropped by mobs, use a resource called labor points collected over time. Labor points are gained by playing the game at a rate of 5 points every 5 minutes. If you're a founder status, however, you gain at a rate of 10 points per 5 minutes while online, and 5 per 5 while offline. We'll also be coming back to the labor system and how it changes ArcheAge later in this video. Now, to get these crafted goods to different locations, ArcheAge implements a trade route system, where players ship their good across the lands to towns. This allows for other players, be it opposing factions or pirates, the chance to raid trade routes and creates a feel of merchants and mercenaries, as it is common for players outside of guilds to hire others to protect them while en route. Now let's get into the pros and cons of the game and why it will or will not work in America. First, we'll start with its strengths. Right off the bat, ArcheAge gives players a feel of real combat. Abilities look like they hurt, they feel like they hurt, and they give you a sense that your character is becoming the hero or villain the storyline is making you out to be. The animations in this game are so beautifully done that I personally had a hard time going back to the other MMOs, like WoW or Rift. It had completely spoiled me. Being able to drop kick across the screen and knock down an opponent, it kept me incredibly amused and pushed me to enjoy the combat of the game much more than other MMOs. Outside of combat, the game still looks beautiful, with landscapes matching the implied backgrounds of the races. For example, the Harani have an ancient Chinese heritage feel to them, and as such have architecture and landscape that portrays this quite well. The game is just overall beautifully done, and early on gives the player a sense of progression without a lot of it. Another strength is the diversity of classes. My friend and I both played similar skill sets, mine being Battlecraft, Shadowplay, and Oromancy, while his was Battlecraft, Shadowplay, and Sorcery. Even though we shared two of the same skill sets, I went a more heavy bruiser-type character, while he sat in the back launching volleys of arrows and spells, making sure to stealth or knock down opponents if they got too close. He ended up respecing keeping the same skill set, but went a more melee DPS build, which worked out just as well. The simple change in allocated points gave the game the diversity in builds that it needed to set it apart, as the skills and abilities were things I had never expected, much due to the animations and how well they worked. The open world aspect of the game was also an amazing thing. Being able to see the land change and watch as player-owned farms or homes sprung up across the land brought sort of an Animal Crossing feel to the game. In a matter of hours, I had witnessed PC villages spring up all over the map, and had witnessed the player economy start to take shape in the first few days of the closed beta. For promising a new style of MMO, ArcheAge delivers and offers almost everything I've wanted in an MMO, but like other games, it does have its shortcomings. The first and foremost for me was the lack of instance PvE. The game offers few dungeons while leveling up, which stagnates the options for gaining experience, to grinding, doing quests, and gaining a small amount of experience when you do practically anything in the game. Endgame content is restricted to open-world bosses, which may sound like a good idea, but when you think of it, end up terribly for those guilds who do not have a high player count, as they can't compete with guilds that do have a high player count. You can take the 50 most skilled people and have them accomplish a boss without problems, but if you throw a 200-person Zerg guild at them, they won't be able to take down the bosses and the players. This makes endgame content owned by guilds with high player counts and takes away a large skill aspect to the game. The other aggravating part of the game for me was the labor point system. If we take an average day of 4 hours of gameplay, that translates into 240 labor points, meaning that in one day you could craft 4 things, sometimes more or less depending on what you make. This isn't, of course, counting the farming and grinding you'll need to do to get the materials, which can also use labor points such as with mining. To add to this, opening coin purses, which are dropped by every mob in existence and take increasingly larger amounts of labor points. When all of this is added together, you get an obscenely high amount of labor points needed, and without founder status will take too long to acquire them. For a free-to-play game, ArcheAge really pushes you to drop the money to get founder status, and even then you'll have players waiting to cap out on labor points just so they can do a day of crafting, and this is just a really bad problem. The last major problem, however, though, is the game is really grind-heavy. Leveling early on is super quick and makes the player feel like progression is an easy thing. However, around level 20, the experience required to level rockets up, and it starts taking a whole group of quests just to level, or even just get half a level. The game has that Korean grind feel to it, such as with games like Monster Hunter, and pushes the player to put in hours upon hours to reach max level, or even level 30 where PvP starts to happen. For me personally, the grind was just too much, and with testing out different classes and races, I wasn't able to push myself to reach 30, and couldn't experience what the game was designed around outside of the random duel here or there. When I started playing this game, I was mesmerized by it, completely entranced by the new feel it gives a player right off the bat. However, as I sloshed through the grind, I found it increasingly harder to play, and in a matter of days, the game had lost its magic. However, ArcheAge is in a position to fine-tune itself and easily make it into an amazing game. For me, with the addition of instance PvE at endgame, and some more early on to help push leveling, the game would be amazing. The grind was just too much, and I felt like I was making no progress. It didn't help that I also had to wait around a lot, just to get rid of my stat debuff if I died, as it also took labor points to do that, or to open the hundreds of coin purses I had in my inventory. And so with all of this, I dub ArcheAge the rating of the Klingon. This game is a great concept, but is missing a few things to make it amazing, and not something I just goof around with every now and then. I honestly hope Treon will be able to convince the host company of the game to make a few changes, and bring this game into a new level of gameplay. Thanks for watching, and be sure to subscribe for more reviews, tips and tricks, and gameplay footage.